Good afternoon to you. It is 4:06, and we are live from our Kingdom Financial Group studio here at 5th and State, the Joel Natale Show on Talk Erie, also live on Facebook and YouTube. Every month we have, generally on the first Tuesday of the month, we have a conversation with the CEO of our county, the county executive, Brenton Davis. Brent, good to see you, sir. Welcome in.
Good to see you, Joel, as always.
What's happening? What's keeping you up at night, or do you sleep like a baby these days?
Well, I think there's a lot of things, but I tend to get the rest that I need to make things happen. But I've never been a big sleeper to begin with.
No.
So
you're not like a like Trumpian, where you're like on Twitter at 2:30 in the morning, right?
I try not to do that. Those late night tweets, I think they tend to get you in trouble. I try to keep my tweets to I don't tweet at all, but
right.
I tend to do it during business hours. So, there's that.
Well, it's interesting because, here it is February, right? So the budget is pretty much put to bed. So, there's a lot of drama that happens in the fourth quarter, right?
I guess that all depends on who you ask.
Okay.
But
expand on that.
Well, it's like anything. So you had the vetoes. This all comes down to vetoes, and a lot of people need to understand. Really, the future of Erie County's form of government is on the ballot. For the first time, government's operating in a way that it's meant to, with the checks and balances, an executive veto. You don't have a Democrat in the executive's office with a rubber stamp council of other Democrats that kind of just collaborate and co-govern. That's not the way. Like a bunch of commissioners, essentially. That's not what this executive form of government is meant to do. We should be able to outmaneuver other communities by empowering an executive, empowering an administration, and having the fiduciary purse, in the hands of county councils along with elections. So in looking at these vetoes right now, the 23-24 budget decision that we've appealed to the Commonwealth Court, the future of Erie County is really at the stake of this court, because in the event that you have a part-time council that is able to pull any item off the agenda just because, that's illegal, we're going to strike this from the agenda. So by getting 4 votes to strike it, they're basically saying we're not even going to talk about it, right? We're not going to take any action. They believe that their premise is that removes it from the agenda. We're saying, well, fine. In the Home Rule Charter, it's clear. You take action, or within 10 days it becomes law. If you choose not to take action on an item 10 days later, it's no different than something coming to my desk. I choose not to sign it. Well, if I don't veto it, 10 days later it becomes law.
Right.
So that's the same premise. So the ability for them to veto, they do have the ability to override an executive's veto. That's with 5 votes. And, it wouldn't matter. And you and I were kind of joking earlier. Let's say I want to compete with Elon Musk and I want to put satellites into orbit and be Starlink 2.0 with county taxpayer dollars. Not something we want to do, but take an outlandish situation where you have somebody that wants to do something wild.
Yeah.
And council just doesn't agree with it. All they need to do is get 5 votes to override it, and that kills that. So there is a process in which they can do it. But what's unique about this council, they're trying to utilize a false premise of if they strike it from the agenda with 4 votes, it never happened. But they're only doing that with things that they can't count to 5 on. So they realize they don't have the 5th vote. So that would essentially, the veto would be wouldn't be overrode. Right. And my veto would carry, and things would have gone the way that it's gone. I think. Well,
are they just for understanding? Aren't they getting this kind of advice on this tactic from their counsel?
Well, if that's what you want to call it,
from their solicitor.
But it's funny. You look back. I can quote council members. There's times where even Andre Horton himself has called their own solicitor the 8th member of council. I've heard this over the last how many years as the 8th member of council. You look at any other meeting, school district meeting, city council meeting, whatever it is, and you look at how many minutes, their so-called attorney Tallarico speaks. It's appalling, to the point where you're engaging in dialogue to sway minds politically as opposed to the line and the letter of the law. And I think this is going to be council's ultimate downfall. When you take political advice from an attorney that's not going to stand up in the court of law, that's where you run afoul. And that's why they call them, even themselves, have quoted as the 8th member of council. Mm-hmm. So, to me, did they get legal advice? I would use that term loosely, I guess, to answer your question.
So, and you have counsel, right? You have a solicitor for the executive's office. So, I mean, we basically have a difference of opinion on the interpretation of the Home Rule Charter and Commonwealth law, right?
I mean, I would even argue it's at the basic understanding of the English language at a reading level. You know, I mean, I think the process is very clear in the Home Rule Charter. You know, if choosing to strike something from the agenda, they do it all the time. So let's say, for instance, the administration sends something downstairs. Say we get new information, or we look at it and go, hey, there's a clerical error in what was sent downstairs, maybe in just a typo or wrong number. I mean, mistakes happen administratively with as many staff as you have. And you say, hey, look. Or maybe say you're going to send an appointment down and somebody says, hey, you know what? I talked it over with my spouse. Like, I don't think this is a good fit after agreeing to do it. Well, you say, okay, well, why would you vote on it? You're not going to seat somebody that's withdrawn their name for one reason or another. So all they do is strike it from the agenda. Mm-hmm. They're all agreeing that they're not going to discuss it. It's removed from the agenda and it moves on. Well, when you do that as a part of the budget process, they're trying to apply a process to the budget process that makes absolutely no sense. And I mean, I honestly think, I mean, they're going to lose terribly in court over this. And let's just say hypothetically, if this type of thing were to carry, what's the point of the veto? Is all you need is 4 votes? You would never override a veto. You just strike. That's not the point. That's not how our government was constructed. I mean, it's the same thing with a governor's veto. Mm-hmm. It's like anything. The House and the Senate can pass something. If the governor chooses not to sign this, it does not become law. Right. You know, so I mean, there's the reason why these checks and balances, and it's never come to fruition. I think there's some folks that want to say like, oh, well, you know, look at this toxic relationship between the members of council and the executive. Like, keep in mind, this is 3 members of council. Like, I mean, there's always been 2 abstractors no matter what you do, even with Dahlkemper in office, you know. Yeah. So at the end of the day, I think it would undermine every premise of our government. And if that's the case, you might as well have a part-time council, hire a county administrator, and they will be forced by law to do whatever wild idiocracy that this council can come up with. You know, I mean, there will be no more checks and balances, you know, and it will become incredibly dysfunctional and I think reckless not having that. So I stand steadfast in, you know, our budget stands as proposed. They're strikes, they're improper. And I mean, that's what our appeal to the state court says. And I look forward to, you know, 3 judges, you know, wrapping their legal brains around this and seeing that from a different perspective and what their ruling will be.
But to be clear, you know, Court of Common Pleas judge from another county saw this case and decided for counsel.
So, no, I mean, I wouldn't say that they decided for counsel. I think what he did, I mean, you got to look at how his ruling was. I mean, you look at what counsel asked for. Okay. Like, they wanted a very broad ruling saying, like, oh, his vetoes are illegal. I think this judge knew that there was going to be an appeal no matter which way it went. So, I mean, he made a very narrow decision based on 23, 24 budgets, which, mind you, is water under the bridge and it's funding it's already spent. Mm-hmm. And if it's not, so, I mean, this is what I would pose to members of council, because I know there's several of them that listen to this. You know, as they're sitting there, I mean, it just goes to show, again, the lack of understanding that several of these members don't have when it comes to the budget. The $1.2 million in adoption revenue, had I not vetoed that, that would have been 110 kids that didn't go to 74 loving families. So that money is spent. So if you're saying, well, we're going to have to figure out how to rectify it, and, you know, their so-called legal counsel says, well, these departments are going to figure out how to pay it back. So exactly how does a county department pay county government back for the very entity that it works for? That in itself is just dumb. But on top of that, how do you refund a state grant? So mind you, my veto on the adoption revenue, it allowed us to bring $1.2 million in. So under your premise, okay.
So you were vetoing the expenditure because it had you were vetoing the strike of the expenditure because it had an associated income, right?
So not only, I mean, more simplistically, it wasn't an expenditure; it was revenue. That's right. They don't even understand. This is money coming in. So that's basically like saying, hey, you have a $1.2 million bonus coming in from wherever. It's coming in from the state to support adoption revenue. It's always been there. They looked at 1.2 million and said, well, let's cut this line item. Had absolutely no idea what it was for and why, and didn't even realize the differences in columns between expenditures, which are costs, and revenues or money coming in. That's what I've been saying this entire time. I mean, these folks that want to pretend like they're budget geniuses, it's not reality. They're being fed money from the Joe Maloney's and the Mary Rennies and all these folks that line up at the Jefferson and want to pick this budget apart. It's the same ones that take to social media that haven't been relevant in county government in a very long time. And keep in mind, it's the same folks they're advising are the ones that got rid of these folks to begin with, in a previous council. So, I mean, just understand, if you don't understand the most basic principles of money coming in and money going out and the differences of a liability and a revenue column, which is very simple in any basic accounting budget, right? If we were to have to return that $1.2 million, that means Erie County taxpayers would have to take $1.2 million out of our reserve money and then explain to the state, hey, yeah, that grant you gave us for $1.2 million, yeah, our council says due to this court case, we're going to have to pay it back. Mm-hmm. The state is going to look at us like we have three heads. Right. And I don't even know if you could give back a grant, previously. Like, it's just, it's the very premise. This is Erie doing Erie stuff. I've said it over and over and over and over again. Anything that is a win for what they perceive as the administration, these members of council view this as a loss for themselves. And that's the unfortunate part of, this us versus them controversy that tends to go on. But again, that's the checks and balances of government. I mean, I would argue when you have 4-3 votes on things, you've found the center. Like, I would be alarmed at looking at the 7-0 votes or the 6-1-0 votes that we've gotten used to around here, that we think that's what good government is. I mean, when you've got rubber stamps on air, and don't mind you, I would love to have some 6-1 and 7-0 on some things, right? But that's not all the time. I think when you see the 4-3 votes, that means we're on the cutting edge of government. That means we're pushing the envelope and we're really challenging the system and the status quo, because no one gets everything, right? Mm-hmm. And you don't have, and that's why, even in my boards, authorities, and commissions appointments, I have pretty much, turned over every single one. I've put somebody new in there, fresh faces, new ideas. We're a change agent administration. There's no question about it. So, those are the things we need to keep focusing on.
We're talking to the county executive here on the Joel Natale Show. It's 4:19 on Talk Erie. Talk Erie and the Joel Natale Show. Moving along on a Tuesday, it's our monthly meeting with the county executive, Brenton Davis. If you have a question for him, phone lines are open, and also text lines, 814-679-1080. County Executive Davis, the Governor Shapiro laid out his budget. A lot about economic development. I know that's kind of a subject that you are very, very passionate about. Anything that you heard there, or just some of the things that have been coming from Harrisburg that will, help Erie in a big way?
Well, I mean, you just look at this. I mean, so we just talked about how the county's budget gets put together, right? And the ebbs and flows and kind of the struggles associated with it. So when folks want to say, hey, it's dysfunctional in Erie County, right? You're going to see the same thing play out here in the state's budget. I mean, if you really pay attention, the governor just laid out his priorities, just like I did in the priorities of county government in my budget. And mind you, I mean, I just find it ironic. We have a Democratic governor that's very bullish on economic development. Right. I mean, you could have literally taken any one of his speeches and taken them from my first 2 years in office, and he could have used them to campaign on. I almost bet maybe he did. Mm-hmm. But, we sit there and joke about that. But the reality is, you look at how the governor is bullish on economic development, a Democratic governor, yet our Democratic majority on council wants to defund and has tried to defund the county's economic development right here in the 2025 budget.
Let me ask you, what is the reasoning that they're portraying to you that they want to defund your Office of Economic Development?
That's a great question. I don't think, everybody knows that they launched this great big investigation, and after we gave them thousands of data points, hundreds of pages, where's the results of that so-called investigation? I'll tell you why they didn't come out with anything, because I don't even think they can understand what they were given, number one. Mm-hmm. And number two, there was so much stuff that was put into that they didn't even bother giving it to the other 4 members of council, the three Democrats that handpicked it. So you've got these 3 so-called Democrats that want to investigate economic development, and then you ask the other 4 members of council, they don't know what the results of that so-called investigation were. I think because they got absolutely overwhelmed. I mean, I know I counted something like myself alone, I had like 4,300 economic development contacts that I turned over to them. 4,300. And you're not even talking about organizations, members of my staff, anything else in terms of just the different data points. I mean, I turned over Excel spreadsheets, all kinds of stuff. Yeah. Document after document after document with hundreds and hundreds of contacts, thousands of contacts. So, I mean, you sit there and look at the work that's being done. I mean, it comes down to the same thing again, right? It's Erie doing Erie stuff. It's these folks on council look at it as a win for the administration, not as a win for the community as it is. Because I don't benefit by bringing a factory here. How do I benefit from that? I'm a construction guy. Like, I do my own thing. Like, my income is set, right? Like, I didn't take a giant pay cut and become county executive because I need the money. I did it for love of community, for love of country, for love of turning this place around. That's what this comes down to. I'm willing to fight those fights, and I've proven that. These folks view a win for my administration and a win for the community not only as a loss for themselves, but a loss for Democrats as a whole, because you look at the trends, you look at what President Trump's doing, you look at his approval rating, you look at all these things. Folks of Erie County are, I would say by far and large, pretty happy with the way things are going right now, and they voted for it. So at the end of the day, we're getting the stuff done. And I think it's just really, it's trying to throw any monkey wrench in any kind of positive progress. I mean, it's things like, why would council oppose spending $900,000 or $1 million out of the Greenways grant? That's Marcellus Shale impact money that my budget, my budget this year included $1.1 million. They slashed nearly every nickel of it. And that's restricted money. The only thing we can use that for is parks. We can only improve parks, build playgrounds, put in trails, improve the quality of parks. I had $1 million in my budget. This Democratic majority decimated that line item. So why on earth would you oppose utilizing money that comes here from oil and gas drilling as an impact fee? It's supposed to improve our communities. So you want this money to sit in a bank account? What sense does that make? And I can tell you, I think whether it's pickleball courts, whether it's trails, whether it's anything, whether it's a memorial park like the Veterans Park that we gave money to down by Collegiate Academy, it's things like that. communities deserve to have green spaces, and that's what that Greenways grant is for. So why would they oppose it? Other than just not wanting the Davis administration to dole out $1 million in funding. That's the only logical explanation.
Let me just make sure I understand this, because the county's not in the parks business, but you're able to funnel that Greenways money that comes to the county and funnel it out to the municipalities. Is that accurate?
I mean, that or any parks, like say, for instance, that's a nonprofit, the Veterans nonprofit.
Sure, yeah.
But any parks project that would be out there. So I mean, that's money that we just have sitting in an account. This Greenways grant impact money keeps
I'm sure
up.
Like Union City would love to have help at Catholic Park.
I mean, and we did. I mean,
yeah.
the Devereaux Park is where some of that money just went down there. So I mean, we're getting some of that money out there, right? But I'm sitting there saying, okay, in this budget, much like the governor's laid out his priorities, like, oh, we're going to expend X in education and X in workforce development, whatever it is. I said we're going to spend $1.1 million in investing in our community's parks. You know, that's the money that we have. Like, this money benefits no one sitting in an account. Like, how does it improve how does money improve a quality of life for any resident that's meant for parks sitting in a bank account? That's the question these members of county council need to answer.
Now, one question that might come up is, would you only target parks outside the city, or were city parks involved in your list there?
So we've had several. So say, for instance, there'd be a couple city parks that we've looked at.
Okay.
So, I mean, obviously the first one we did was Veterans Park. That was in the heart of the city. That was the first and only one we've given money to. So, I mean, we led with that Veterans Memorial Park in the city. You know, but I mean, there's such a great need. You know what I mean? Regardless. But I would argue this. I mean, the city has a parks budget. You know, so
they do get Greenways fund as well.
100%. Yeah. And that's why, folks, they want to make this, well, Davis is against the city. No, I'm not. I understand the different streams of revenue that come in, and I don't believe the city of Erie should benefit twice from a particular stream of revenue that they already get, and the surrounding municipalities get squatted on just because of politics. That makes no sense. So, I mean, I'm here to ensure that there's equitable benefit. You know, we hear so much talk about equity, but when you start applying it to the rural townships, you know, magically it's crickets with some of these members of council. It's only equitable when they want it to be.
All right, we've got to take our bottom of the hour break here. The county executive, Brenton Davis, is with us here, and we'll take a news break, and then we'll get into more of the conversations here. You know, you've got economic development, you've got health and human services, you've got things that are going on in the library, and so on. There's a lot to talk about, so stay with us. Thanks for tuning in to Talk Erie and the Joel Natale Show, live from our Kingdom Financial Group studio here at 5th and State. The Erie County Executive, Brenton Davis, is our guest for his monthly meeting here. Our phone number, 814-679-1080. And I'm thinking a little bit more, Brent, about, our place in, our Erie County's place in the nation, in the state, being a place of that is attractive. And I think there's something to be said, and I don't know if you guys have these conversations about our workforce and our population and drawing new jobs here and so on. Talk, what comes to mind when we talk about things like that, Well,
I mean, you sit there and look at it. I mean, like we talked about the governor's budget,
Yeah.
like how we talk about, Governor Shapiro obviously wanting to be a 2028 presidential hopeful. He's always, now starting to have that conversation. Pennsylvania must compete with the rest of the United States. I was like, I think we've heard that before.
Right. Yeah.
He's saying exactly the same things that I've been saying on this show for nearly the last decade. You sit there and look at, you have so many strengths, but the problem is, we are Pennsylvania. We are, the birthplace of America. We are the Quaker state, and that comes with a lot of drawbacks. Many different forms of government. And William Penn, insulating government on top of government on top of government, is a knee-jerk reaction to colonialism and, imperialism and kings and things of that nature. But, you sit there and look at sometimes all these different governments that we have get in the way when you look at major metro areas, like you were talking about living in Nashville and, Raleigh and all these different places in the South that are newer states and newer governments where they're like, look, we don't need school districts. We don't need boroughs. We don't need townships. We don't need all this bureaucracy and all these different layers of taxation, So, we have a bit of an antiquated system. So, Governor Shapiro, much like myself, we're having to play catch up and we're having to swing outside of our weight class, and that's what I've tried to do in my budgets. That's obviously what the governor's trying to do. And, I'm not a fan of everything that he does, but I'll tell you what, the one thing I've learned in politics, is I'm with you. If I'm with you 80% of the time,
right,
I'm 80% your friend, not 20% your enemy. And I try telling people that where they're like, well, you son of a gun, you did this one thing that I don't like. I'm like, well, we did these other 12 things. What'd you think of that? And they're like, well, I'm good with all that. Well, okay, man. Well, I'm more of a friend to you than I am an enemy. And that's really the way I look at Governor Shapiro. I don't agree with his stances on a lot of different things philosophically, and that's okay. But when it comes down to brass tacks, he's coming out supporting the fire tax, or not fire tax, but EMS, supporting our first responders, supporting economic development, supporting education, all those different things. Looking at the issues that really matter. So, to me, you got to look at, it's almost a mirror of a larger scale of what we're trying to do here and what we've been doing for the last 3 years ahead of the governor right here in Erie County. So, looking at those things, you have to invest in yourself and you've got to do things strategically. You've got to stretch your money. It's things like we're doing with the unhoused, taking this money, we're on, I think we're on homeless, tiny home number 7 today. So we've got 7 out of the 25 from phase 1 that are well underway. The first 2 are going to be transported tomorrow to Crawford County Votech to get the interiors finished at no cost.
Wow.
So we're buying the materials. We've got students learning a trade that are going to build houses right here in our region, and we're doing that at no cost. What government entity can say that they got something built for dang near the cost of materials? You can't hear that. You can't see that anywhere, through volunteerism, through workforce development. And it goes back to what your question is, how do you develop that workforce? Well, it's building those partnerships. Looking at reentry programs, working with the Erie County Votech, the ECAT. We've got calls out to all these different programs. I reached out to Chautauqua and Ashtabula. Ashtabula students are doing something similar, so they aren't able to participate in our stuff. But, Crawford County didn't have a project like that. So they're like, heck yeah. They're like, if we can do 5 of these houses for you for nothing and you provide the materials, because most of these trade schools, if you visit them, they build a tiny house indoors and then they tear it apart. And then they build it again. They can't afford the materials year after year after year. I'm like, wait a minute, hold up. Like, I'll buy the materials. You build the R spec, and the awesome part about it is you got the drafting students that are doing the drawings. They're collaborating with the carpenters or collaborating with the HVAC people, the electricians, the plumbers, the drywallers. These are all students. That is real world experience. You take a plan, you all work together, they all learn each other's trade kind of as they're going and work around each other. That's real world experience, and it's for a great cause. So, I mean, it's innovative things like that, looking towards what are the emerging economies? How can we innovate as a government? It's how, things like, you look at what Elon Musk is doing, drilling down on government waste that exists like we don't need. You saw the largest downsizing of county government this year in the 2025 budget led by my administration. We reduced county government by 74 positions. We identified 74 positions that we didn't need, and we still have vacancies. So really it's looking at how can you leverage technology? How can you innovate? How can you do these different things to get the job done to better serve the taxpayer? Do we need switchboard operators anymore? Do we need boiler tenders? Like, those things don't exist. So, why aren't we modernizing? And nobody bothers to ask those questions, and those are the things that we're doing. When we're getting in here, we're flipping over rocks, we're cleaning out the closet, and we're doing spring cleaning in the summer if we need to. That's the reality, and this is what we're getting done.
But there is a reality that we have these municipalities. We do have school districts. We have authorities. And I would love to hear kind of your take on leaning in on, whether it's the redevelopment authority or the port authority, Erie events, and so on, to be able to make a 1 + 1 = 3 scenario happen and really build this economy.
But I guess with the 1 + 1 = 3 is something that I would say it's just not reality. I'll tell you, and again, it goes back to Erie doing Erie stuff. Is all you have to do is look at who's in charge of the boards, authorities, and commissions. The executive directors, by far and large, make $50,000 more a year than I do running a county, plus another $25,000 or $30,000 in benefits, retirement, and all these other perks that they have, for running an entity that's a fraction of what county government is. And then you look at it, they're generally the who's who that are connected to the past political dynasties. You look at it, look no different than, okay, you had the Dahlkemper administration. You had Gary Lee as the director of administration. Well, then they create the DEI commission, and magically Gary Lee gets a $150,000 a year job. Do you think that's by coincidence? And out the door, Dahlkemper promises $10 million to this DEI commission that we've known has failed terribly. It's not about progress for the people. It's not about doing better for Erie County. It's about taking care of their cronies. Everybody who's lived in Erie County long enough knows you can look at the vast majority of boards, authorities, and commissions. I don't believe that they have a 40-hour work week. We create these entities. They're duplicative forms of government. And I would say the only time where 1 + 1 = 3, it isn't the benefits, it's the cost. We spend $1 to spend another $1. We're spending $3 for $1 of gain. And that's what you get when you duplicate all this overhead. It's things like ECRA. It goes back to the Hatfields and McCoys of previous executives and county council chairmen like, oh, we're getting this new gaming revenue. Well, I don't want you to have it. Well, I don't want you to have it. Well, let's create this so-called apolitical thing. Well, we all know now. You look at the executive race. I'm calling BS on this, and I have a long time. When you're saying this entity's apolitical, the truth is going to come out, and now it's finally on the ballot for everyone to see.
Mm-hmm. But it's not. It wouldn't be proper for the county to run the port. It wouldn't be proper for the county to build the business parks. You know what I'm saying? This is why we have these authorities.
So under state law. But take like Miami-Dade County. Miami's a thriving county. They do all of the above. They do housing. They run the port. They have their own police department. They have all of this. You look in the South, they run the school districts. This is the antiquated Pennsylvania way of, an authority can do it better. And I get it, but the premise, when Governor Shapiro says we need to catch up, these authorities are literally the dinosaurs of the past that are in our state law. So go to these other regional metro governments. You don't have it. Like their economic development department would do redevelopment work, housing work, would have the casino gaming revenue to implement these economic development projects without the bureaucracy and without paying this whole different boards, putting them forward, all these other offices, all these executive directors, these long-term pensions. You know, that's all a detriment to the people of Erie County. You know, and to me, now you look at like all the political infighting that happens as a result. Because I'm going to tell you right now, I mean, you look at it. I'm a change agent. I've said it from the very beginning, and I'm unapologetic about it. You know, if you're wasting taxpayer money and you're not doing what you need to do, I'm coming for you. There's no questions, no ifs, ands, or buts. People might not like my approach, but that's real. I didn't come here to make friends. You know, I got enough friends at home. I don't need friends at work, right? I'm here to work for the taxpayers. Those are the only friends I need, the voters. And I mean, they've spoken and they've elected me to do this job, and I'll do it, and I'll do it without apologies. So, I mean, you sit there and look at how this system is completely ineffective. I mean, you look at how these projects are, how people have to play the political system twice. You know, now we have this political system of appointments on the Housing Commission, appointments on ECRA, appointments on DEI. And now you're taking people that you think, I mean, what's the accountability for a person that's part-time, right? You're a part-time unpaid volunteer that you're signing up to get the crap kicked out of you by a community, and you still got to take your kids to soccer practice, do your job, pay your bills, pay your mortgage, cut your lawn, and do everything that everybody else has to do. So, I mean, it's not a system that's set up for success. I mean, when the governor talks about Pennsylvania needs to compete, these are the relics of the past. Like we look at, oh, this is how it's done. Well, anybody who's gone anywhere, and I mean, I sat as the chair of International Economic Development, you know, for NACO. You know, I'm still a vice chair this year in my re-election campaign year. So, I mean, I've done this for several years now. When I look at other places that I visited and talk to my colleagues and I look at national best practices, the communities that move quickly are the ones that can organize, do things in-house, and like you said earlier on this break, they're lean and they're mean. You know, and having 50 some boards, authorities, and commissions, is that lean and mean? And then each one of these directors making $150,000 plus benefits. I mean, that's a $200,000 bill for an executive director that's going to get a pension for life. When you could do that with the same offices that you already have at the county, the same personnel you already have at the county. That makes absolutely no sense. But I think the reason why this happens is because typically the people in the past, as we've seen locally, don't have that background, don't have the business, don't have the economic development background, whatever it is. They want to abdicate their authority to somebody else and say, oh, well, we'll let them do economic development. That's not what they're there for. The chamber's not here to be economic development, and we've funded that for hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars. The chamber's not here to attract businesses and do site development. And, you know, I mean, they did the best they could with what they had, but good initiative, bad judgment. You know, if you want to be successful, there's a right recipe for doing this. You know, and if you want to compete, you've got to do it, and you've got to do it well, and you've got to move fast, and you've got to be effective, and you've got to be able to bring things to the table that attract those businesses. You have to set the foundation, and we haven't done that. So much like Erie County and the governor, we're all playing catch up here in Pennsylvania, but you see how his priorities in this budget surround economic development, workforce development, childcare, all the things that were in my budget that we literally just passed. So, I mean, this isn't a Democratic thing. This isn't a Republican thing, because anybody that wants to say that, I call BS, because look no further than Governor Josh Shapiro's budget. It's a larger scale budget of essentially the one that I've put forward. You know, so I mean, the priorities, I mean, there's a lot of overlays. So, I mean, to me, this is about recognizing the shortfalls of county and state government and working to break down those barriers, you know, and getting rid of the duplicity, getting rid of the secondary politics, and then making sure that you're doing strategic investments with your revenue streams like gaming revenue to make strategic plays that make money with your money, that you leverage money. You turn $5 million into $25 million like we have with Project Resolve or, you know, the gap funding program, things of that nature. I mean, that's really what it comes down to.
It's interesting to hear you, because if I look at your budget, I see that you're in the human services business, right? Well, that's the biggest chunk,
and
right?
It is. I mean, 450 is human services. But here's the thing. is you got to look at the need for human services goes up when there's what you would call like suffering, right?
Right.
You know, there's people in need. Well, what is the one metric that you can fight to lower your social service budget? It's poverty. It's hands down, whether it's childhood low education, teen pregnancy, whether it's elderly senior citizens that can't afford their houses, whether it's our homeless residents. I mean, the previously incarcerated folks in reentry programs. There's one metric. It's poverty. All roads lead to poverty, and you make your investments based off of that data. Because, I mean, think about it. If you're able to generationally change the tides, right. You put forward an innovative government, you look at the emerging economies, and you can raise the average wage here from, say, what it is now at like $30-some thousand a year on average, from 30 to, say, 60. If we could double the average income in Erie County, we would vastly per capita reduce the amount of people that need public assistance, and you change that trajectory for the next generation. You're taking folks that are maybe their family is, a system of generational dependence upon social services and welfare. If you can break that chain, no matter where they come from, black, white, brown, male, right. female, whatever, it doesn't matter, Lower East Side, Albion, Corey, Union City, wherever. Mm-hmm. You can come from the most impoverished areas and get somebody that's typically on welfare that maybe has an average family annual income of like less than $20,000. Mm-hmm. Well, you break those tides and get them to where they can make $45,000, $50,000 a year through workforce development, through educational programs, through outreach, early childhood education. You change those pathways through upper economic mobility, and you get that to change. So now that kid that grew up in poverty is now a middle-class family. So now their next kid can hopefully be that lawyer, doctor, accountant, whatever it is.
So here's where the dots connect, though. It's very possible that the DEI Commission could fund somebody like Erie's Black Wall Street, who's doing major work in financial literacy to break people out of poverty, right?
I mean, you could say that, but I would disagree because you're not seeing that. I mean, what I most recently saw out of Erie's Black Wall Street was funding a $10,000 grant to Jasmine Flores to buy a house. You take a city council president.
But she went through a program. But she was picked
irregardless
in a blind
to me, I would say that's
deal.
I mean, to me, it shouldn't have been in there at all. So, I mean, you look at stuff like that. And in the military, we have a saying, 1,000 attaboys are taken away by one aw crap. Right? Mm-hmm. You can do 1,000 things right, but it's a death by 1,000 paper cuts, right? Like you could do 1,000 things right, but you make one misstep, you throw out all the good that you've done because you undermine the very system. The DEI Commission, I would say there's plenty of ways. If you want to do financial literacy, we don't need to pay a guy $150,000 plus benefits, plus office, plus overhead that per capita right now or per percentages has taken out of the $3.5 million allocated by the county, they've used up $1.1 million plus, so 38%.
But it wasn't happening. That's the issue.
100% it wasn't happening. So I mean, I would say
this is the issue. These are huge gaps that these folks have found in our superstructure of why people have been held behind. Right? I mean.
And you do that, I would say, through opportunity. We don't need commissions. We don't need boards. We don't need authorities. We don't need nonprofits to do these things. If somebody wants to start a nonprofit, but here's the problem that I would argue in this town. You look at how nonprofits, the first thing they do is run around and look for grants to do whatever it is. So, I mean, that's all good and well. But, I mean, you go back historically, that's not the way things were meant to be. There are more jobs in this town. Everywhere I go, I got employers that are like, I can hire 10 people today. So, I mean, it's not a job problem. If you really want to learn about financial literacy, okay, then we fund financial literacy through employers, through high schools. I mean, again, it goes back to training these folks before they even hit the adult world.
But somebody has to administer that. You know what I mean? There has to be somebody who's on that job, right?
And
I've got like a minute left. Keep going.
I mean, I guess to me, I would argue, financial literacy should be taught in schools.
Oh, totally.
You know what I mean? I mean, and that's
it's a both and.
That's one thing. And I mean, you don't need a commission. You don't need a high dollar nonprofit. You don't need to spend millions of dollars to teach financial literacy. I think there's ways to get it done, but everywhere you go, you follow the money, And you always find an executive director, an exorbitant staff. You always find the 157 coffees and the doctorates paid for on the taxpayer dime. You always find these things. And that's what I'm saying. I mean, like, I'm not opposed to doing general good in society and filling the gaps. All I'm saying is, like, fat hogs go to slaughter.
I got 30 seconds. What are you going to be working on this month? What's dominating your time?
I mean, we've got a lot of things. I mean, we got EMS, we got the Tiny Homes Project, we got continued wraparound services in the Community Resilience Center. Just forging those things forward. We've got millions of dollars in EMS. We got millions of dollars in economic development, municipal gap funding that we need to get out to support all 38 municipalities. So we've gotten millions of dollars investment that touched every single borough, every single township in Erie County. And for once, we actually have some equity here.
The County Executive, Brenton Davis, thank you so much, sir, for taking your time.
Thanks for having me.